Now, Miguel Delaney joined Jerry Gilroy and Owen Sheehan on OTB-AM this week to discuss the controversial Newcastle United sale, which now looks set to go ahead.
I can see how difficult a situation it is for the Premier League, for their architecture as well, to kind of say, well, like, my members here want to be able to sell to the highest bidder, which, you know, by ruling billionaires out and nation states out, will prevent them from making money down the state. And also the government. Like, am I going to be the sports organisation that goes against the government and says, actually, what you're doing on a geopolitical level is wrong? So where is there a way out for anybody in this that is going to allow face to be saved, or allow we're actually doing the moral thing? Like, what's the path to this not being allowed to happen, at least in future?
Well, I'm not sure there is one, because, I mean, especially for the fact that this does feel such a line in the sand. For a state like Saudi Arabia to own a football club just feels like the ultimate low, and really the point of no going back. And well, you could argue we're kind of been travelling in that direction for some time anyway. And it's also why this is such a massive story beyond even the actual takeover itself, because it does reflect where football is going. I mean, the game, and particularly the English game, through through kind of initial regulations in the 1980s, through the breakaway to Premier League, it's probably integrated hyper-capitalism more than any other industry on earth. I mean, I did a piece in this in February, and like David Goldblatt, the football historian, put it to me basically that it's probably more hyper-capitalistic and more an open global market than international banking, which is saying something. And that's, I mean, this situation then is a consequence of that, and also a consequence of the Premier League kind of being so, you know, international, non-judgmental about owners in that sense.
I can see what Miguel is saying there, but isn't the horse bolted when it comes to money and football? And the UAE, another state involved in Manchester City, and does it matter ultimately? Because I remember going to Wolverhampton there before Christmas. There is nothing going on in Wolverhampton. Nothing. And I understand why they voted for Brexit. And the only thing that's going on in Wolverhampton that I saw was Molineux and this amazing stadium.
Have a nice race course.
Well, if you like the all-weather, I hate the all-weather. And the great stadium, and they're owned by Chinese, Fosun. Jorge Mendes is heavily involved, very much a Portuguese flavour to Wolverhampton. But that is what, to me, was the biggest thing around that area. I suppose the question for Newcastle fans, 53106 or at Off the Ball on Twitter, does it devalue anything you win if you have the Saudi Arabian government behind you? Does it mean that Newcastle might as well be in Riyadh or Fiji or South America? But do you have a really real moral view on this, guys? Or do you just see it that the horse is bolted in football and they can't really regulate this anymore without reversing what the model has become?
Well, there's morality, and there's also the identity of the club. And obviously, you know, you're talking about the lesser of two evils here in some respects, because the current regime has been pretty horrible for Newcastle, and I think that's why their fans seem to be coming out in favour of the Saudi investment. Now, people might look at me and say, I voted for proposed Saudi investment in Galway United not that long ago. Now, the way it was given to us at the time, and we had people from Galway go over to Riyadh and met the people over there, we were told quite specifically that they weren't representatives of the Saudi government. Now, maybe in hindsight, you know, we could have done more homework on it. In the end, it completely fell through. I've no idea why, but the Saudi government, you know, you don't need to spend too long online to know that the Saudi government has massive questions to answer in so many ways. In terms of press freedom, is actually one of the worst performers in the world. You know, execution is still very normal over there. You know, it's deemed a regime where you can basically take out a journalist who voices opposition to the regime in an embassy in Turkey, try to bury it under the carpet, then admit it happened, but kind of try to disassociate yourself from it. Now, if Newcastle were to go on to win things under that sort of a regime, and essentially a regime that's trying to kind of give itself some sort of a favourable... A gloss in the West, like, which was, you know, what the leader did in his kind of early days. He tried to curry up favour from the West and, you know, put himself out as a moderniser. And a lot of very bad dictators are actually quite benign in their early days for tactical reasons. So buying football clubs in Europe is quite a tactical thing. And, you know, if Newcastle fans are fine with that, personally, I've said this about Manchester City. If I were a Manchester City fan over the last 10 years, it just wouldn't really interest me to buy success the way that they have, and to basically be owned by, you know, people that have no affinity whatsoever with the area, and they're they're doing it for very sort of strategic reasons that aren't really sport related. That just wouldn't interest me. But when you're getting involved with a regime like Saudi Arabia, it just wouldn't be for me at all. And you look at.
But Johnny, what fueled your excitement when the Saudi thing in Galway was happening? It was the possibilities. Like, it was the possibilities because it was your club, and you see a way out of the drudgery, I suppose, that you've suffered over a period of time. But this is the problem, John. I mean, you throw it out to Newcastle fans. Like, fans aren't the correct arbiters on this. We are in a time where fans just want to know who they can sign the next transfer window and how can we win. And they don't really want to know too much beyond that, and they can.
I disagree long term. I don't think clubs are going to.
Johnny, we've seen it with Man City. We've seen it.
Yeah.
You're saying, Dan, they don't care.
25 years time. But what ultimately, if you're from these parts of England, working class areas of England, that over time have no local players and are basically owned by foreign entities, eventually this is not going to mean much to local people. And I think that's
not
a worrying.
True, Johnny. It's Newcastle. It's not going to change. No,
I disagree.
But this is why they're. This is almost why they're so starved of success, they're willing to accept anything. Like, some of the grief that Miguel and people are getting for making very fair points is unbelievable. But it sort of emphasizes the extent to which how people can just be so one-eyed about their support of their club that they will tolerate and accept anything. And we've seen it previously with Suarez and Liverpool, and people will take a position on a very serious topic based on the club they support and their loyalty and their entrenched position with that club. And it's not a healthy debate. I do agree with your basic premise of what you're saying, John, that the horse has bolted. And if the Premier League were to take, say, a stance on Newcastle now, then you end up in the game of whataboutery over, well, what about this regime and that regime? And, that's a very fair point. And there's a sort of this is like the sort of moral vacancy of the Premier League to an extent, but yet to some degree, like, everyone has to accept a degree of complicity in it, because the Premier League, that the monster that it is now, that it's the biggest payer in the world, the global behemoth that it is, it's funded by TV money and rights from around the world,
including Qatar.
If you dig in, exactly, and if you dig into everyone that's funding it, then nobody's safe in terms of judgment. There is no perfect club. Like, people judge Man City sometimes, but yet the other big five clubs have gone in with Man City on doing deals around protecting their wealth. So no one is clean. But this is the thing. But that still doesn't mean, though, that you just suspend your journalistic intentions and say, well, they've had a hard time in Newcastle, so understand their anger. This is fine. I mean, there's a James Montague piece in The Athletic this morning, which contains quotes from Jamil Khashoggi's late partner, and the
abuse she's gotten as well is absolutely off the charts.
She's getting grief for this, and I think if you read that, but you can't expect Newcastle fans to judge on that, because they're seeing a way out of some misery they've had. But that, the sensitivity to people pointing out that this might be wrong, it can be pretty deflating, I imagine. But I don't know how you solve it, John, because I do agree with your point. We've gone so far down the road that while this may be an extreme case, I guess the Premier League has made a rod for its own back to a degree.
Briefly, Johnny, was it the potential? Was that why you were okay with the Saudi potential investment in Galway?
Well, you see, the situation in Galway was, and as much as we had become in the early stages of a fan-owned club in Galway, and I was a member of that club, we essentially had absolutely nothing. We had no home ground that we owned. We didn't have anywhere to train.
That's the same reasons, Johnny. That's the same reason.
But no, hang on. So what I'm saying is, if the Saudis came in and everything went completely P-tong, we really wouldn't be any worse. So I was looking at the worst case scenario here. As much as all these Middle Eastern regimes that you can are so questionable in so many ways, and you're just kind of throwing oil money around and blah blah blah. As much as I kind of put faith in the vetting that we'd done, and I did believe that their intentions were decent. They spoke an awful lot about really investing in facilities and investing in an academy, and that was the main thing for me. It wasn't just throwing money at senior players. Now, I regret the fact that I sort of questioned the people who voted against it, because my attitude was we had nothing as we were, so we had nothing to lose. But if I look at the League of Ireland, when I look at the likes of the way Bohemians are run, Sligo Rovers, as much as they're not going to win stuff as much as Dundalk and Sligo Rovers and Shamrock Rovers, there's a great kind of feeling going out and supporting those teams and knowing that ultimately they're following a team that's run sustainably and isn't really there to make money. And I think I would worry about football in the long term, because if all clubs in England, that's the way they're going, if all clubs really lose their identity of their local area, what's the actual point anymore if they're just a load of millionaires from another country wearing different colours?
But that's what it is already. That's what it is.
Well, I think that clubs in London, for example, the club I support, Spurs, there's not much of a community around Spurs or Arsenal as there would be around Newcastle.
There's just day trippers going to games. It's already happened.
But Johnny, the point is, if Newcastle,
people going to games, they're not from Liverpool. They're getting their season tickets from local people, and I'd say there are an awful lot of people in Liverpool disenfranchised because they've kind of lost the football club already.
I'm not sure if I don't know if those people exist, Johnny. Like maybe some of them do exist. I know there's been some complaints occasionally about like tourists coming over taking tickets, but not really. There's a lot of still romance, or it's this perceived romance about the Liverpool story, the connection to the city. Now,
for Liverpool, if you're from Liverpool, try to get.
But my point is, Johnny. My point is, like, this is about the ethics of like the sports washing. And like, if I have no doubt that if Newcastle went up and were a top 4 team, the fans, the scenes and the fan atmosphere around Newcastle would be amazing. It would be incredible, and they bring in players like the equivalents of De Bruyne or David Silva or whatever. And I love watching Man City. Like I'm open to being a hypocrite here. I love watching Man City. Yet at the same time, you think about it, think, wow. And if Newcastle would be the same, if they became an amazing team, fans would get swept up in it, and people would almost, yeah, sure. What about that other stuff? Well, it happens everywhere. It's a bit of a pleasant,
Well, I think that Newcastle as well, that it is one of these cities that they've got. This is really it in Newcastle. As Kevin Keegan once said, in the south they go to the theatre, in the south of England, in the north they go to Newcastle United and St James's Park. So they're obsessed with it there. And it's a good debate, and we'll have probably more of the debate as we go on.